All right, I just saw that this got posted. I've been following this case for, at this point, essentially years, but at least over the past year. Um, I recently graduated with my political science, public law stuff degree, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, I am also a previous speedrunner. I've ran at GDQ and things like this. I've been familiar with both Apollo Legend, Billy Mitchell, and Karl Jobst. And so I have maybe a unique perspective in that I would say, possibly legally competent. Obviously, I'm not a full blown attorney or anything like that. Um, and I don't have any bar license or anything along those lines. But I do have at least a base level of knowledge, sort of how this stuff sort of works and how the conclusions sort of work and the processes. And then obviously, I've been following this story from the start, and so I wanted to review. I've also followed Perfect Pac-Man. He's been doing basically daily catalogs of inside the court case of each day of testimony, as it was going on and things like this, as they were calling witnesses, giving their statements and opinions as to the various facts of the case that they were familiar with on each person, etc. Okay, so let's go through this. I disagree with the decision, and I'll point out, I think, why. Essentially, I think the judge is not capable or competent enough to understand the full context to give the proper ruling, and that is why I believe he's come down and resulted in the incorrect ruling in this case. However, that's sort of, it's his fault and not his fault, right? Like, it should be the duty sort of the attorneys of the plaintiff and the defendant and whatnot to provide that context and make it available for him and inform him of that context so that he can make the proper decision. And so I think in many respects, it's not his fault, and it's actually, in this case, Karl Jobst's lawyer's fault in that case for failing to sufficiently provide that context and inform him of that context and bridge that gap of why it is relevant and why that it changes this analysis. Anyway, so let's go and
the parties that it's taken so long since trial to do
go through this. He's going to be on 2x speed just because I want to make this like a reasonable length that somebody would actually potentially watch, but it's actually on 2.5x speed. So hopefully you can understand this. If not, there's the original video that I can link. And if not, I'll pause probably intermittently, and we can also go over the captions and whatnot. Okay.
Parties will realise the trial raised a lot of factual and legal issues, but they may not realise that I also had a number of other commitments during the months since the trial. What I'm about to say is a summary of my reasons for judgment. I expect it will take about half an hour. This summary should not be taken as a substitute for my full reasons, which will be published on Queensland Court's website, together with a shorter summary later today. The plaintiff. So
I could potentially make a follow-up video going over the full summary, and perhaps he will cover some of these issues in more detail in the full summary, but regardless, I don't think the full summary will magically make what I deem to be a very wrong decision into a decision I would magically start to agree with. I don't think that would be the case.
Mitchell III, commonly known as Billy Mitchell, lives in Florida, United States of America. He has been well known among adherents of video and arcade gaming in many countries, including Australia, since 1982. At an arcade and video gaming competition in November that year that took place in Ottumwa, Iowa, USA, playing an arcade game called Donkey Kong, Mr. Mitchell scored a world record 874,300 points and was the first person. So he's going to go over the claims of Billy Mitchell here. Now, I know at least some of these are heavily disputed and basically confirmed to not have happened. I don't know that all of these are confirmed to have not have happened. Possibly some of them did happen, but regardless, I don't think it's really important to the facts of the case. But regardless, the point is like, oh, Billy Mitchell is this notorious person, but for these reasons, but these reasons actually didn't happen and don't exist. He made them up. I feel like that's kind of a missing context, but whatever. That is, reaching the end of the game. At the time, he was 17 years of age. Mr. Mitchell went on to be recognized as having...
I don't know why how old he is matters either.
They included achieving the first perfect score of 3,333,360 in another game called Pac-Man in 1999, setting a new world record and the first score of over 1 million points, the record being 1,047,200 points in Donkey Kong in June 2005, another Donkey Kong world record of 1,050,200 points in July 2007, and a third Donkey Kong world record of 1,062,800 points in July 2010. Those records were recognized by such bodies as Guinness World Records and Twin.
So Guinness World Records is essentially like a publishing company, but is not a verification company in that extent. They sometimes mostly verify records, but you can also just like apply for records and claim them by like paying money and filling out a piece of paper, right? So they are not like an authority on truth. That's kind of what I'm trying to get at. So whatever. Okay.
Twin Galaxies.
And Twin Galaxies is even worse, right? Twin Galaxies did not have stringent verification for their records a lot of times did not require any video proof or anything, sometimes even just a screenshot, which can very easily be doctored. And like Photoshop has existed for decades at this point, right? And even before that, I mean, a lot of these, like a screenshot could be, 100 pixels tall or whatever. You could individually go in and pencil tool pixel by pixel change it if you wanted to.
Which is an American company that organizes gaming competitions and keeps a database of records and rankings across various.
Okay. It claims to keep a database of records and rankings. It does not actually do that in any material way that reflects reality, okay? And nobody has taken them seriously for over a decade at this point.
Various gaming platforms.
Almost a decade and a half.
In 2017, Mitchell was accused of having cheated in achieving his Donkey Kong World records by
Yes.
using computer emulation software instead of original.
Now, he was accused prior to 2017. However, I would say 2017 is kind of where the proof became more than purely circumstantial or statistical. It became irrefutable, let's put it that way. But the suspicions had been there for a long time.
And in April 2018, it announced that it had concluded that two of Mr. Mitchell's world record scores were not produced by the direct feed output of an original unmodified Donkey Kong arcade printed circuit board, or PCB. It was not able to determine whether the third score was produced on original arcade gaming hardware or with the use of emulation software. As a consequence of its findings, it announced that it had...
Now, is this played on MAME? That's one aspect of why Billy Mitchell's scores were found to be cheated. Now, the other aspect is that people did statistical analysis of the rate at which you acquire points in Donkey Kong scores, and of every top player's games that have been submitted, right? Going for a record, above 1 million, above 900,000 points, whatever you want to call it. And there are sort of established strategies of how to attain the most points, and the established strategies of what are the points that are worth the risk to go for. There are high risk, high reward strategies, low risk. You want to find that balance, right? Of like being able to consistently beat the game and reach a sufficiently high number of points without losing the game beforehand, but also maximize the points that you're gaining while doing so, right? Billy Mitchell, his scores, I don't know whether this score specifically, but I mean, even before the MAME stuff, okay, this is why it was already essentially certain to anybody who had a brain that Billy Mitchell was cheating these scores. Because uniquely, Billy Mitchell's scores, when compared to every other game of Donkey Kong played by every other top player in the universe, in the history of, humanity, uniquely gets like astronomically more lucky. Okay, it's the dream Minecraft speedrunning situation of Donkey Kong. That is exactly what it is. He does strategies that don't make sense. He gets astronomically more lucky than any other player, and his strategies, to the point of they would only make sense going for those strategies if you knew you were going to get lucky, right? And people have done better breakdowns of this, again, on like perfectpacman.com, I think is the blog, ran there or whatever, going over all this information. But like, this is already established fact before any of this MAME stuff comes out, before any Todd Rogers stuff. This was already known, is that his scores were not legit because he obviously like save stated and retried them over and over again or spliced them together or whatever to get this like absurdly high luck, or there's no RNG manipulation thing that he did, right? Is like he then, he cheated to get luckier than he should be, and that lets him achieve a higher score than he should otherwise be capable of doing, and that the only way he's able to achieve the record score is by cheating in the first place, right? Okay, so that's essentially the situation before any of this has ever happened already, going into this. That he does not have context for.
The following day, Guinness World Records announced that as a consequence of Twin Galaxy's decision, it too had disqualified Mr. Mitchell as the holder of all his records, both in Donkey Kong and in Pac-Man. Mr. Mitchell commenced proceedings in the United States for defamation against Twin Galaxies and a number of others. One of those lawsuits was against...
Now, these are frivolous lawsuits that he has no legitimate claim to be making. These are frivolous and retaliatory and an abuse of the legal system that is unlawful.
It's a young man, Benjamin Smith, who is known online as Apollo Legend. I refer to him as Apollo Legend in my reasons. He published videos on YouTube about gaming, including a number in which he accused Mr. Mitchell of cheating, falsifying his Donkey Kong scores, and not using legitimate gaming.
Now, he accused him of those things, but those things are factually true, which is, as far as I am aware, in most countries, is an absolutely affirmative defense against a defamation claim, is that the claims are factually true.
Hardware. Mr. Mitchell and Apollo Legend settled that proceeding on 22 August 2020.
Now, they settled this proceeding despite the fact that this was again a frivolous lawsuit that Apollo Legend should absolutely affirmatively win decisively, without question, beyond any and all reasonable doubt, correct? But they settled it because Apollo Legend is like a kid. I mean, he was, I would say, less than 25. I don't know his exact age, but right? And like legal, whatever proceedings are costly and time consuming and stressful. And so a lot of times things settle, but that does not serve as the definitive proper resolution of the actual issue in that case. Okay. I would hope he would be aware of that.
All his YouTube videos and social media posts that referred to Mr. Mitchell, he would assign copyright in those.
Now, these are the terms of the settlement, which I think is fairly obvious are in Billy Mitchell's favor in kind of an unfair manner, a lopsided way. Let's put it that way. He's going to say, in exchange for no longer being defamed, this is the whatever reconciliation that I'm getting in return. But realistically, he was not defamed in the first place because it was an affirmatively, verifiably true statement that does not make it defamation by definition. And so this is a completely one-sided settlement where only one party is having to make concessions and the other party is just abusing the threats of legal proceedings to bully the other person. Okay, so that's what happened.
Mr. Mitchell, and he would permanently cease producing any oral, written, or electronic documents or communications that in any way mentioned or referred to Mr. Mitchell or his family, apart from making an agreed statement in terms provided in the settlement agreement.
And as part of his settlement, he cannot basically ever speak the name Billy Mitchell ever again in his lifetime. Okay, that's what that just said.
Any breach by Apollo Legend of the last of these obligations would result in him being liable to Mr. Mitchell for $25,000 for each breach.
Now, what it's going to cover next is that Apollo Legend later took his own life, and in his one of his last acts, I guess, was to publish a video describing the various I guess reasons or mental state impacts, things in his life that had led him to choosing that option, taking his own life, choosing to do that action to take. And in this video, he did not mention Billy Mitchell. Now, why would he not mention Billy Mitchell? Because surely that was a stressful thing that he came to a settlement on, a completely one-sided settlement that he knows he's in the right and does not, legally speaking, he's not liable for anything for making those statements. But if he is to mention Billy Mitchell in this video by name, his family, his estate, would then be liable for at least $25,000. Now, if you're already feeling bad enough about yourself to take your own life, I would imagine you also feel bad enough that you don't want to impact your family by having a $25,000 debt that your personal estate or whatever is now, liable for, right? So that's why you wouldn't do that, okay? I think that makes fairly rational sense. So, despite the fact that he's not mentioned, that does not mean that it's not a factor. It just means the impact of the $25,000 is viewed as more important and a choice he's making compared to the actual truth of what truly is impacting him, right? I think that makes logical sense to most people, hopefully.
He did not have to pay Mr. Mitchell any money. Apollo Legend appears to have complied with that agreement. However, on 20 December 2020, he published a video on YouTube, referred to in his proceedings as his goodbye video, in which he told viewers that he was recording his final video. He said, "This is the end of my life," and he explained why. In that video, he did not mention Mr. Mitchell, nor the claim against him or the settlement agreement.
But this is irrelevant because of what we just went over and what he just mentioned.
Shortly after publishing,
Seems obvious.
The defendant, Karl Jobst, lives in Queensland. He regularly publishes videos on YouTube, mostly about speedrunning, but also about video and arcade gaming world records and people who cheat in those games. He has over 1 million followers.
He does a lot more than just world records and people who cheat in video games, but that's also kind of a good description of Jobst's YouTube channel, so fair enough.
On his YouTube channel. On 26 May 2021, he published a video about Mr. Mitchell and another video gamer, Todd Rogers, entitled "The Biggest Con Men in Video Game History Strike Again." He accused Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Rogers of cheating and of pursuing unmeritorious litigation against people who had accused them of cheating. He also said
Now, both of those are factually true, which again is a complete affirmative and sufficient defense to a defamation claim. That the claims you are making are objectively true, which they did cheat and they do file frivolous lawsuits. So check.
About Mr. Mitchell. Quote,
okay.
He also sued YouTuber Apollo Legend for $1 million. I haven't spoken about this publicly, but this lawsuit ultimately ended with Apollo giving in and settling with Mitchell. He was forced to remove all his videos about Mitchell's cheating and paid him a large sum of money.
Now, Apollo Legend did not pay him money, but at the time, Karl doesn't know that, and Karl actually does have a source that has told him that he did. So the only thing Karl knows at this point is that he did do this, which it's the truth from his perspective. It can't be malicious defamation, an act of malice, or malice aforethought, He can't have the mens rea to commit defamation if what he's saying he believes to be factually true, and he has no way of knowing otherwise at this point.
Left him deeply in debt, which required him to find extra work. But with his ongoing health issues, this was all too much of a burden, and he ultimately took his own life. Not that Billy Mitchell would ever care, though. In fact, when Billy Mitchell thought Apollo died earlier, he expressed joy at the thought. The lawsuit
Now, that is also factually true.
against Apollo was just as frivolous as the rest, and Apollo definitely would have won him.
And yes, this lawsuit was as frivolous as the rest, including this very lawsuit that is currently being referred to, or whatever, presided over by this judge.
Court, but again, he was extremely ill and couldn't handle the ongoing stress.
Yep, that makes perfect sense, even if there's no monetary component.
End quote. That video containing that passage was online for 10 days from 26 May 2021 before June 2021, and for an additional 5 days from 9 June to 13 June 2021. In between those dates, and since 13 June 2021, the video has remained online, but it contains only the first 2 sentences and the last sentence of the passage that I've just read.
Now, the first 2 sentences and the last sentence is a very strange way to refer to this, especially when there's no text version provided, and he's going to use this term several more times. But I don't know. It's confusing, but we'll just move past this for the sake of time.
While the video was first online in its full version, 2 relevant events occurred. First, on 3 June 2021, Mr. Mitchell published his own YouTube video in response to Mr. Jobst's video. He denied as lies the assertion that Apollo Legend had paid him any money as part of the settlement, or that
Sure, but Karl Jobst has no way of knowing that otherwise, and he actually has a source telling him the opposite, falsely or incorrectly.
he had had any involvement with Apollo Legend that had led him to commit suicide.
Now, that's a claim that Billy Mitchell can't affirmatively make as a factual statement, but sure, it's his opinion. It's probably in his best interest and for his public persona to pretend that that is true. I don't know that that is true. I suspect it isn't.
He asserted that Mr. Jobst had effectively accused him of murder.
But I think those are opinions, not factual statements.
He ended the video by saying,
Now, he didn't accuse him of murder. He accused him of contributing to the mental stress which leads a person to choose to commit suicide, which is not always a rational choice, obviously, in the first place, right? And that certain things can seem larger in proportion or severity than they actually are, and more impactful on a person's life than they actually are, or whatever. So obviously, he didn't accuse him of murder. Murder requires, like, actual active premeditated killing of another person, which I don't think was the case. But it is true that his choice to frivolously file lawsuits against a person for defamation in which is not defamation, just to bully them via the legal system and get one-sided, lopsided settlements out of, is a stressful factor that can influence a person's outlook on life. I think that's just objectively true.
quote, I plan to respond the way that everybody anticipates for me to respond.
Now, why would everyone know what to anticipate you to do unless you were known for doing that?
Karl, expect me, end quote. The second relevant event is that a mutual acquaintance of Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Jobst, known online as Keemstar, contacted Mr. Jobst at Mr. Mitchell's request and told him that it was not true that Apollo Legend had paid Mr. Mitchell any money. Mr. Jobst agreed to take down that part of the video while he investigated that issue further. While not taking it all down, he only left up the first and last sentences of the passage that I read. He then emailed Apollo Legend's brother to ask him whether Apollo Legend had had to pay any money to Mr. Mitchell as part of the settlement. Mr. Mitchell's lawyers then served a concerns notice on Mr. Jobst, asserting that he had defamed Mr. Mitchell. In response, Mr. Jobst
Again, he can't have defamed him if he believes the information to be true at the time and has no way of knowing otherwise, and then did his due diligence afterwards to try and correct that mistake when it came to his attention that it was not true. But no one had told him it was not true prior to this. You could potentially argue that it should be the proper due diligence of Karl Jobst to reach out to these people before making his video. Okay, sure. Does that rise it to the level of defamation, or just some sort of reporting negligence? I don't know.
posted that letter on Twitter.
Hard sell for me.
And that any action would be an amazing experience. He then reinstated the original version of the video on his YouTube channel. It was not until 13 June 2021 that Apollo Legend's brother informed Mr. Jobst that Apollo Legend had not paid any money to Mr. Mitchell. Mr. Jobst then altered the video again to remove all except the first 2 and the last sentences. That version has remained on his YouTube channel since then.
Because, as far as I'm aware, everything else said in that video is factually correct.
The video containing all
I haven't watched the full video to be stating that, but as far as I'm aware, that's true.
passage was downloaded in the periods that it was online by over 500,000 people.
Now, no, 500,000 people did not download this video. They streamed the video. Those are different things.
Including over 20,000 in Australia. Since then, over 8,000 comments have been made on the video, including at least 396 that, it may be said, accused Mr. Mitchell of causing Apollo Legend to commit suicide.
Now, I don't think there are nearly 400 comments accusing him of being the direct cause. I think there are probably 400 comments that allude to it being a contributing factor to Apollo Legend's choice to commit suicide. And I think those are a very important difference and entirely central to the case, and yet this should not be misconstrued or misframed as the other when it is the prior or the other, whatever. Now, being evil and a scumbag are also not factual statements that rise to the level of defamation. Those are opinions.
Comments have also been made on videos by other publishers on YouTube or other online media. The most recent that has been brought to my attention having been made in early 2024. In this action, Mr. Mitchell sues Mr. Jobst for defamation, claiming $400,000 in general damages and $50,000 in aggravated damages. Mr. Mitchell contends that the video.
Now, those dollar amounts of damages are based on appearance fees, public appearance fees for showing up to essentially conventions or other retro gaming style events and things like this that Billy Mitchell is claiming he lost out on because of this negative press and defamation that occurred. Now, it's entirely fabricated and theoretical, hypothetical by him whether these speaking contracts or whatever appearance fees would have existed in the first place, and it's based on the evidence provided in court. Highly, let's say, optimistic that he would have made all of those appearances for that much money.
Particularly the passage that I read, made 5 defamatory invitations about him. Those invitations were, first, Mr. Mitchell had required Apollo Legend to pay him a large amount of money to settle Mr. Mitchell's defamation claim against him.
So that is false, but he had no way of knowing it was false and corrected it upon being made aware that it was false.
Which caused Apollo Legend to go in considerable debt and to take on extra work to survive. Secondly, a major contributing factor in Apollo Legend's decision to take his own life was Mr. Mitchell's requirement that Apollo Legend pay him a large sum of money to settle the defamation claim.
Now, no, that is not what the video said. The video said that the lawsuit was a significant factor and the stress of the financial, or the stress, and there is still a financial component of having to go through the process to even get to the point of a settlement, right? So no, that's not correct what it said, as far as I'm aware.
Third, Mr. Mitchell had hounded Apollo Legend to death. Fourth,
now, that's not a claim of fact. Mitchell used a frivolous lawsuit to bully Apollo Legend, and Apollo Legend later choose to take his own life. But those are two independent, separate events that sure are related, but they're only related. One is not a direct, necessarily causal result of the other. And I don't think Karl was implying otherwise.
Or alternatively, a cause of Apollo Legend taking his own life. And fifth,
now, yes, he was a cause, a contributing cause. That is, I think, just factually, obviously true.
Mr. Mitchell's conduct was a contributing factor in Apollo Legend taking his own life.
Yes, that is directly factually true.
Mr. Jobst denied that the imputations alleged by Mr. Mitchell were made in the video. I have found that the video made each of those defamatory imputations.
I don't know how you can possibly do that. That makes no logical sense to me.
Mr. Jobst also defended the claim on a number of other grounds. First, he alleged that Mr. Mitchell had a pre-existing bad reputation, that meant that any of the defamatory imputations alleged would not have harmed him. That reputation,
which is objectively true and correct. Now, people, independently of Karl Jobst ever making a video, in a hypothetical world in which Karl Jobst never makes a video, would people have also come to that conclusion that Billy Mitchell's frivolous lawsuits against Apollo Legend would have contributed to the choice of Apollo Legend potentially taking his own life? Absolutely, they would have. I would have, because I did before Apollo Legend, or before Karl Jobst ever made his video. That is clearly something that would obviously be potentially a contributing factor that one could hypothesize about. Obviously.
Mr. Jobst alleged was threefold. First, Mr. Mitchell had cheated to gain recognition as the highest or one of the highest scorers in Donkey Kong. Secondly,
which is objectively true, he did.
He had used litigation processes to coerce others to recognize him as world record holder in Donkey Kong and to refrain from identifying.
Which is objectively true, he did use frivolous lawsuits, which he should have legally lost and had no standing to make in the first place.
Him as a person who had been found to have cheated at video arcade games. And
but he did do those things, and truth is an absolute defense to defamation.
third, that he would ostracize anyone he considered a threat to his world records in Donkey Kong.
Now, he wouldn't. He did not ostracize them. That is not an act that one person can do. Really? Ostracism is sort of a social thing of a larger, many more people. One person cannot choose to ostracize, I guess, really, in the way that that word and definition makes sense to me. Let's go back.
At video arcade games. And third, that he would ostracize anyone he considered a threat to his world records.
So, what Billy Mitchell would do is that he would abuse the legal system and his public, whatever, persona and appearance and speaking to disparage the people who he believes has wronged him, and that's why he files frivolous lawsuits against him, even though he has no legal standing to do so, as abuses of the legal system. Yes, he does do that. He retaliates
in Donkey Kong.
Yes.
As to his alleged pre-existing bad reputation, I have found that Mr. Mitchell did have a reputation as a cheat in Donkey Kong, and a reputation for suing people who alleged that he was a cheat.
No, for frivolously suing people, when he has no legal standing to do so, to bully them via the legal system. It's not that he sues people who alleges that he cheats, it's that he frivolously does so. He uses it as a tool to enact stress and hardships and harm upon other people, okay? It is not a defensive action, it is an aggressive action. It is a escalation act, right? Like, you can't claim self-defense when you're the aggressor. That's not how it works.
Found that he did not have a reputation for ostracizing anyone he considered a threat to his achievements.
Yes, he does have that he did. That's just wrong. Of course he has that reputation, because you just listed like 7 examples of him doing exactly what you're saying he doesn't have the reputation of doing. Of course he would have the reputation of doing that. He did that. He has the reputation of acting truthfully, representing his past history. Yes, he has that reputation because it is a factually true reputation.
Mr. Jobst's other principal
I'm going crazy.
Was that the video made 5 other defamatory imputations, each of which was substantially true, and as a result of which...
Now, those were not substantially true. One of them was substantially true, but got later corrected, which is the normal journalistic sort of best practice, common thing to do that happens all the time. And nobody gets sued for defamation over it.
The imputations about which Mr. Mitchell complains did not cause any great harm to him or his reputation.
I think this is debatable. I think Billy Mitchell does plenty enough to harm his own reputation, and I don't think this is a knowable question. I think it is irrelevant to the matter at hand. I think if his harm is sufficiently bad, which it is, there's not much worse you can really do, unless you actually are stepping into the land of defamation. But when you're purely speaking in factual claims, or claims that you believe to be factual and then have no way of knowing otherwise, I think you have a pretty solid defense there.
Those imputations, which are referred to in defamation law in Queensland as contextual imputations, were: first, Mr. Mitchell was publicly exposed as having cheated to achieve his record scores in Donkey Kong.
Which is true.
Second, Mr. Mitchell was banned from submitting scores to Twin Galaxies for cheating. Third,
which is true.
Mr. Mitchell had planned to create a video that he could use fraudulently as evidence that he had achieved the score of 1,062,800 in Donkey Kong. Fourth,
he didn't plan to do that. He did do that. That's how the score was previously thought to have been legit before being discovered as cheated.
Mr. Mitchell had callously expressed joy at the thought of Apollo Legends' death. And fifth,
that's also factually true.
Mr. Mitchell used litigation to force third parties to recognize his achievements in video gaming.
He, uses frivolous lawsuits to bully others into complying to display what he wants the public to believe is factual verification of non-cheated records, but which is not that, and was never that in the first place, because there was no verification standard at the time, really. Beyond a judge saying, "Trust me, bro," he did that. And the other judge saying, "Trust me, bro," is also a no cheater.
I have found that all of those contextual imputations were made in the video. All but one of them were substantially true. It was not true that he had planned to produce a fraudulent video. To be clear...
But he did make a fraudulent video. We have that video. Of course, he planned to do it because he did do it.
Yeah, I was not required to decide, nor did I decide, whether Mr. Mitchell had in fact cheated in gaining any of his world record scores.
Right, you don't need to decide that, because it's already known to be true.
Jobst did not attempt to prove that finding by Twin Galaxies was correct. Notwithstanding any of his world record scores, Mr. Jobst did not attempt to prove that finding by Twin Galaxies was correct.
Karl Jobst did not need to determine whether that finding was correct. It was already known to be correct.
Notwithstanding these findings, I concluded that the defamatory imputations made by Mr. Jobst that are subject to Mr. Mitchell's claim have caused substantial additional damage to Mr. Mitchell's reputation and have caused him considerable additional distress.
Now, I'm sure it causes you distress to be, publicly mocked and known as a cheater who frivolously files lawsuits because of your own narcissistic ego against people illegitimately as an abuse of the legal system to bully others in order to protect that narcissistic ego. I would imagine that would cause you distress, but that's sort of the point of it being the truth, is that sometimes the truth is distressing to people that are the bad people. And that is why the truth is still good to publish, and actually a social good to publish. It is a social benefit to publish, because it makes people less likely to be bad people.
Therefore, Mr. Jobst is liable to pay damages to Mr. Mitchell for those defamatory imputations. I shall come shortly to the amount of those damages. Mr. Mitchell also asserted that Mr. Jobst's conduct in publishing the video, and after doing so, was unjustifiable and caused additional personal hurt to Mr. Mitchell and harm to his reputation, which justifies the court awarding additional damages, known as aggravated damages. This conduct...
Again, This is all factually true, basically, and he has no way of knowing otherwise. I'm repeating myself like 7 times over at this point, but
alleged by Mr. Mitchell included. First, making the allegations recklessly and without checking their truth. Secondly,
now that I think potentially is true. Potentially. I know that essentially Karl Jobst has no ability to know otherwise and has people, in fact, telling him falsely that there was money paid. So I don't think you can legally hold him responsible at this point. You could probably hold the other people legally responsible who are falsely telling journalists that information. Now, I don't think Karl Jobst should be considered a formal journalist. I'm just sort of using that as like a jargon layman term, not a necessarily formal legal term. Obviously, he's not like the New York Times or something. He's just a guy, but he's acting as a journalist in that he's covering a newsworthy thing in hopefully a factual manner by having a source telling him some information that he has no way of otherwise verifying or acquiring on his own.
publishing the video twice. Thirdly, holding malice and pursuing a vendetta against Mr.
He didn't publish the video twice. He altered the video and edited the video that was already published.
Mitchell. Fourthly,
Now, of course, you would hold malice to a person who's frivolously acting as a bully, and you would have a vendetta against people who do so without regard to the emotional and mental stress impact that can take on others and cause them to potentially take their own life, and then also have completely disregard for the life that was then taken or that you thought might have been taken at the time as a result of that, and that you completely have no care for that life. I think I would have a vendetta against those people too, sure.
mocking Mr. Mitchell's complaint about the video and his legal action. Fifthly,
Now, as far as I'm aware, mocking people is part of like basic free speech stuff. I know free speech is a little bit different in some other countries, but like, yeah, you can mock people. That's not defamation. If I think like this guy wears glasses funny or something, I can make fun of his glasses. That doesn't make it defamation, and certainly not to the level of monetary damages.
persisting in his contention
He's a person worthy of being mocked and deserving of being mocked,
that Mr. Mitchell's action against the religion had contributed to his decision to commit suicide.
which it basically affirmatively factually did in some way, because even no monetary necessarily involvement otherwise, that is a stressful thing, and stress causes people to potentially make it impacts their decision making, and then he made a later decision and his decision making could have been impacted. That's just logically has to be true. It's like a tautology.
And sixthly, failing to apologise and to withdraw the allegations.
Now, you don't need to apologize for something if you had no way of knowing otherwise and everything else you said was factually true. You could maybe say that you should apologize, like as a good upstanding person necessarily, but I don't think him apologizing would have made this legally turn from defamation into not defamation. So why is he bringing it up?
I found that Mr.
Now, you can't withdraw the allegations because the allegations are factually true. You can't withdraw them. They're factually true. They're not allegations.
Jobst was reckless in making the allegations. His assertions were
You can't be reckless when they're factually true. How can you make reckless allegations that are factually true? That you know to be factually true. You physically can't be reckless in making them, and they're not allegations. That's not what those words mean. I don't understand.
based on a fallacy, namely that Apollo Legend had paid Mr. Mitchell a large sum of money. That was simply wrong.
Now, they're not based on that fallacy. Whether Apollo Legend had to pay Billy Mitchell money or not, he still frivolously filed a lawsuit against like a less than 25-year-old kid that he knew he had no legal standing for and shouldn't have had any legal standing for, but abused the legal system in order to bully and get a one-sided settlement out of.
Wrong, and he had no reasonable basis for asserting it.
He did have reasonable basis for asserting it because other people factually told him that was true, and it was not true, that he later learned was not true, but at the time he had no way of otherwise knowing that it was true or wasn't true. He believed it to be true, and everything available to him had told him it was true.
After finding out the truth, he has continued to assert that the settlement had a negative financial impact on Apollo Legend, and that he still
Because, I think Apollo Legend had to hire a lawyer to eventually reach the settlement, which cost Apollo Legend money. Not as terms of the settlement, but as terms of having to deal with the process of reaching the settlement. It of course had a negative financial impact. Even just getting a whatever, like consulting for reaching the settlement or something. I'm sure it cost Apollo Legend money in some form. Even just, to be heard or potential as a client, whether or not he ever actually fully went on board as a client of any attorney or something. I don't know. I don't know for sure, but like it seems obvious to me that this would have had some financial impact to him in some manner. That seems like a very low bar to meet, and is most likely very easily true.
He believes that the settlement was a contributing factor to his decision to commit suicide.
Yeah, I'm free to believe that too, and it's not defamation because basically everyone believes that and would have believed that whether Karl Jobst ever made a video or not, because it is obviously true that that probably did contribute.
Mr. Jobst was also reckless and vindictive in publishing the full video twice.
Now, he was not reckless and vindictive, and he didn't publish the video twice. He edited the video to amend it upon learning the one part, the like one sentence part of it was not factually true. He edited out that one sentence. That's not publishing the video twice, but whatever.
At the time he republished
And it's not reckless and vindictive when the rest of it is factually true. It's just reporting the truth.
he had been told by Mr. Mitchell, by his response video, by their mutual acquaintance Keemstar, and by Mr. Mitchell's lawyers that what
Now, their mutual acquaintance Keemstar. Keemstar is also not any person that you would otherwise believe to give you factual information. Like, Keemstar also has his own history of making literally defamatious claims against people on the basis of nothing. He does not provide truth, okay? So Keemstar is not an acquaintance and is not a whatever vehicle for the truth to be spread through.
he had said about payment was not true. He told Keemstar that he would not republish that part of the video unless he received concrete evidence that it was true. But by the time he republished it, he had not heard from Apollo Legend's brother, whom he had asked for information about the settlement, so he did not know any more than he had earlier, but he nevertheless decided to republish the entire video regardless. In his evidence, he said that he did this because he thought Mr. Mitchell would sue him anyway. His attitude appears to have been, well, if I'm going to be sued, I may as well go for broke and damn the consequences. It was reckless and showed
I think his stance was that if he's going to be sued anyway, having the video taken down does not prevent him from being sued, and it's still a social good for other people to be made aware of the factually true information in the video that, at this point, he has no way of otherwise knowing is not factually true, other than he's been told by Billy Mitchell is not true. But, as we've covered, I think pretty far well enough at this point, Billy Mitchell lies all the time. So what Billy Mitchell says cannot be trusted to be truthful either, because Billy Mitchell lies about having Donkey Kong and Pac-Man world records for literally decades and is lying that whole time, like thousands of times over, that he did this on original console hardware, or that he didn't cheat to do this, or he didn't do it on MAME, or all these other things. But he's lying like literally thousands of times. And so, no, you would not trust Billy Mitchell's word as the truth. Of course you wouldn't do that. Nobody sane would do that, because he has a known history of not telling the truth.
an absolute disregard for the truth or for the effect of his video on Mr. Mitchell.
Yeah, if someone has a reckless disregard for the truth here, it's Billy Mitchell, not Karl Jobst.
Reputation.
And it can't have impacted his reputation because his reputation was already garbage, and would have already been garbage had Karl Jobst never made this video. The video had no impact on his reputation. I can pretty affirmatively say that. His reputation would be identical whether Karl Jobst made this video or not.
July
Ever.
2021, that is about 6 weeks after he finally edited the video and took out the offending passage, Mr. Jobst published a video in which he retracted his statement that Apollo Legend had paid Mr. Mitchell money, and he apologized to his viewers for having given them incorrect information. At the trial, he relied on that video as being evidence of his bona fides and as reducing any harm caused to Mr. Mitchell by his original video. However, that video did not retract the imputations at all. It simply retracted the statement
Because the rest of those imputations are factually verifiably true.
that Apollo Legend had paid Mr. Mitchell a large sum of money. Mr. Jobst did not apologize to Mr. Mitchell in any way, rather apologizing to his viewers for having made an incorrect statement in the offending video.
Why would you apologize to the person who you believe vindictively bullied a potential kid into committing suicide, or contributing to the kid committing suicide, who's not a good person? I wouldn't apologize to that person. I would say, sorry, I made an incorrect statement. I wouldn't feel the need to personally apologize to Billy Mitchell in this case either.
Also, this retraction video was, in total, a little over 30 minutes long.
Now, again, if he had apologized, would that turn this from defamation to not defamation? No. So why is it? It's not relevant to the determination of this case at all, whether he apologizes later or not.
First 28 minutes and 24 seconds, it had nothing to do with arcade gaming, cheating, or Mr. Mitchell. It was about particular long, as having made an incorrect statement in the offending video. Also, this retraction video was, in total, a little over 30 minutes long. For the first 28 minutes and 24 seconds, it had nothing to do with arcade gaming, cheating, or Mr. Mitchell. It was about...
Now, if you want people to watch the video, you can't just make it a 2-minute video that has nothing to do with your other content, because people probably won't care and probably won't watch it. So, Karl Jobst doing this probably aided it, assisted it in getting more views than it otherwise would have.
Particular speedrunning. Type of speedrunning. It then went on for a few seconds before it returned with Mr. Jobst's alleged retraction statement, which itself lasted only about 45 seconds. Even then, he wrongly said that Mr. Mitchell had not tried to contact him to clear up the error, and he insinuated that he still believed Mr. Mitchell was responsible for Apollo Legends' decision.
Yes, he's in his right to believe that, as far as I'm aware, and I'm in my right to believe it, and many other people are also in their right to believe it and do believe that, because it's probably factually true.
Mr. Jobst's conduct of this litigation, together with his additional online comments about it, were aggravating features of his conduct. He seems
If you were being frivolously sued, I think you would also probably potentially make some sort of snarky comments online. And again, the question is whether the original stuff was defamation. I don't think this later stuff can be considered aggravating statements. Whatever.
to see himself in defending his claim as a crusader against Mr. Mitchell. He is the last.
Yeah, because a lot of people have, again, otherwise settled with Billy Mitchell instead of going through this whole court process, despite those numerous other lawsuits, him never having legitimate standing or legitimate claim or anything, and just abusing the legal system to bully people numerous times.
Of the defendants who have been sued by Mr. Mitchell, and the only one, apart from Mr. Race, who has not backed down. Even in February 2024, as this action was progressing toward trial, he said in an online interview, quote, Billy Mitchell needs to be destroyed in court. These people need to be punished in a big way before they stop. They need to be...
Yeah, if people are abusing the legal system through frivolous lawsuits, they'll probably continue doing that until they lose a frivolous lawsuit. That's sort of, if they keep getting away with it with no punishment, they're probably just going to, in fact, and benefiting from it by getting lopsided settlement agreements. They'll probably keep doing that, especially if there's a monetary incentive for them to do it. If Apollo Legend had not committed suicide, he's now liable for the rest of his life, basically. As far as I'm aware, I don't know what the time length terms of that settlement were, obviously, but if he ever mentions Billy Mitchell's name ever for $25,000, that sounds like a pretty lucrative, beneficial thing for him to do. So yeah, if you're not going to lose a lawsuit, you would probably continue doing that to potentially make more $25,000, more people liable for $25,000 for ever speaking your name.
To get taught a lesson. So I am now the last chance. I am the last chance.
Yep, it seems like he did need to be taught a lesson, and you are failing to teach him that lesson, and you are in fact teaching him the opposite lesson because this judge was not made aware enough of the context surrounding it to make the proper determination.
And also, the last person on YouTube you want to lose to is me. You know there's going to be 100 vids rubbing it in. I will never let Billy forget this, assuming I win. I've got to win first, but man, if I win, oh boy, I'm not going to be a good winner. End quote.
Yeah, it's not a requirement of the legal profession that you, once you win a case, that you can never speak about the case again, and that you cannot make claims that you're, the plaintiff trying to sue you was frivolous for doing so, and has a narcissistic ego, and uses the abuses of the legal system and needed kind of to be put a stop to. Of course, you're perfectly within your right to make those videos.
Intended to be the knight who slew the Mitchell dragon. Unfortunately for him, his lance was not as strong as he believed it to be, and it has broken in the contest. I found that all...
Really here? The knight, the lance, was not as strong as he thought it was. Billy Mitchell has, again, made false claims for years. We're going to claim that he has the sharper, the lance in this metaphor.
Has caused Mr. Mitchell additional personal harm and additional harm.
Of course it's caused him additional personal harm. If you lied about something for decades, that'll probably cause you personal harm. Probably.
His reputation. It was severely...
His reputation would probably be harmed by lying to people thousands of times for decades. Yeah, that sounds like that would just logically be true. Because that's what happens when you lie to people 1,000 times over for decades.
Merits an award of aggravated damages. Again, I'll come shortly to the amount of aggravated damages that I will award. I was asked by each party to make adverse findings about the truthfulness of the other party's witnesses and the reliability or otherwise of their evidence. In my full reasons, I have given detailed consideration to those submissions. I don't propose to reprise that discussion and my conclusions now. Having made these findings, I consider that Mr. Mitchell is entitled to an award of damages against Mr. Jobst. I have considered other comparative cases in order to help me decide the appropriate amount. Under the Defamation Act of Queensland, the next...
Now, I don't know what other cases you could compare to that is a YouTuber, whatever, guy who cheated records at a video game for decades and makes money, has a hot sauce company and makes money by public appearance fees, but has a horrific public reputation because he was found to be cheating and lying about basically all of his accomplishments for decades at a time, thousands of times over. And then the verifiably true factual statements made by another YouTuber. I don't know what comparative cases he found to make this determination, but I'd be very curious what those comparative cases were, because this is a pretty unique situation in my opinion.
Maximum amount of damages for non-economic loss, that is general damages, not including any aggravated damages, is currently $478,500. That amount can only be awarded in the most serious case. In addition, though, in appropriate cases, additional aggravated damages can be awarded, and there is no statutory limit on aggravated damages. Mr. Jobst contended that for a number of reasons, any damages I award should be minimal, or at least reduced, due to two mitigating factors. One of those factors was that he published the so-called retraction video. For the reasons I already mentioned about that video, I do not consider that it had any mitigatory effect. Rather, publishing the retraction, at the time and in the manner he did, was an aggravating feature of his conduct.
How can... So he's noting in one hand that Karl Jobst is not apologizing and not making corrections for these things, and then later he's saying, oh, he did apologize, but it's also an aggravating feature. What? How? You can't have it both ways. He should have apologized, but also when he does apologize, it's an aggravating feature that makes the damages even more? What? That makes no sense. That's complete bullshit. Like, that makes no logical sense at all. You can't have it both ways.
The attention of the original audience, but instead essentially hid it from view. And of course, he did not retract any of the invitations against Mr. Mitchell, nor...
I don't know that he hid it from view. I mean, the people that are interested in Karl Jobst's speedrunning content and video game content were probably aware that he was going to mention the Billy Mitchell lawsuit and information in later videos, and so they would be watching later videos to find out that information. I don't know. I don't think this judge can make that determination or know one way or the other, and it depends on each viewer. And again, he's mentioning that there are literally tens and hundreds of thousands of these viewers. How can he make that determination on such a broad, general sense one way or the other? It's not going to be a binary thing. It's going to be a gradient of some viewers would be aware and some less aware, but there's no way to determine a black and white delineation between one and the other at any specific, clear point.
Apologize to him. The second reason he gave for mitigation of damages was that Mr. Mitchell, he said, has contributed substantially to the harm he has suffered because he put the offending part of Mr. Job's video into his response video, saying, quote, for those of you who haven't seen it, here's the clip, end quote. Mr. Mitchell's video showing that clip has remained online ever since. It has been downloaded at least 155,000 times.
Again, not downloaded.
As I say in my reasons, this submission might be described as suggesting that Mr. Mitchell called in an airstrike on his own position. I disagree. Both by making a response video and by bringing this proceeding against Mr. Jobst, far from calling in an airstrike on his own position, it was necessary for Mr. Mitchell and reasonable for Mr. Mitchell to identify the enemy's position clearly in order to call in an airstrike on it. That is what he...
Now, that would be true if all of what he was saying was factually untrue, but only one specific part of it was factually untrue, and Karl Jobst was told that it was true and then had no way of knowing otherwise until later. But yeah, sure, Billy Mitchell including it is kind of necessary in his part, but making a lawsuit for defamation when this wasn't defamation is certainly not necessary, because that's the definition of those words, is that it's not necessary when it's not defamation.
He has done. He made clear in his response video that he denied the invitations made by Mr. Jobst, and that what Mr. Jobst had said was false. Of
course he would deny that. Whether he truly believes or not, Billy Mitchell lies all the time. We know that. Of course he would deny that. He has a narcissistic ego that needs protecting. Of course he would deny that. Like, what do you mean? Even if he himself believes and knows it to be probably factually true, he would still deny it anyway and just lie bold-faced, because that's what Billy Mitchell does. He bold-faced lies all the time.
His conduct in publishing this video was reasonable, and it does not justify any reduction in the amount of damages. Factors particularly relevant in determining the appropriate amount of damages include the number and seriousness of the defamatory imputations, the extent of their publication, the effects they have had on the plaintiff personally and on his reputation, and what is known as the grapevine effect. The grapevine effect is the likelihood that the defamatory imputations have been and will be repeated to other people over time, and they may even surface again after this judgment.
Now, this grapevine effect you cannot attribute uniquely to Karl Jobst, because again, whether Karl Jobst made this video ever or not, people would have come to those same conclusions, and this grapevine effect would have spread nearly to the exact same amount that it did otherwise. The people that are aware of Karl Jobst probably are aware of Moist Critical or Todd Rogers or these other, names in speedrunning that cover these things, or Apollo Legend himself, and were aware of these things prior to and continue to be aware of, and would have come across this in some manner or otherwise, and he would have achieved the exact same reputation because, again, he's not achieving that reputation off of one video. He's achieving that reputation off of a long, documented, factual, verifiable, true history of facts of things that he did that are true. Regardless of what one settlement is or not, or the monetary conditions were or not of. That is like 0.1% of Billy Mitchell's reputation is that tiny little aspect. But all the rest of this is the general broad sweeping basis upon which people are judging Billy Mitchell as a person.
grapevine effect arises
with good reason, by the way, with well-evidenced, justifiable epistemological reason.
particularly in cases of defamatory imputations made on social media or other internet sites, including YouTube. In this case, there is ample evidence of the extent of the grapevine effect. It is
Now, there's not evidence of the grapevine effect. There's evidence that other people independently came to that same conclusion. There's not evidence that they uniquely came to that conclusion following uniquely seeing Karl Jobst's video and would not have come to that conclusion otherwise, okay? That's an important legal thing for determining liability here. That he is literally unqualified to make this determination. No person, unless you are like Google and you can see the like individual IP history of everyone who has ever made a comment on Karl Jobst or whatever, and every YouTube account and everything, you could not, it's impossible to make this determination. And it would take years of like, of computer forensics to like make the determination. It would take a decade to track down each of those, whatever, 500,000 people. It's impossible for him to make this determination. This is like legally nonsense. He's completely making this up, in my opinion.
It has been very extensive. The evidence is the number of comments on Mr. Jobst's video, but also comments made on another online personality's videos about Mr. Mitchell, which even recently included assertions that Mr. Mitchell had caused or contributed to Apollo Legends' suicide.
Because he did.
Coming to the amount of damages that I will award, Mr. Mitchell seeks $400,000 in general damages, that is, damages for non-economic loss as it is described in the Defamation Act. In my view, that is too high, being too close to the maximum permissible amount. This is not one of the most serious cases, although it is at the higher end, especially given the most damaging imputation that Mr. Mitchell hounded Apollo Legend to death and the extent of publication.
I don't, how can you, is it even a factual implication that you can say that you hounded somebody to death? What's the factual claim of defamation there that you can affirmatively say was truthful or not truthful? Oh, he didn't hound him, he only puppied him to death. Like, huh? What's even the factual claim here that you can determine as truthful or untruthful? It doesn't even make any sense. It's just a statement of opinion.
Serious and ongoing, including in his evidence at trial and in his publications about this litigation. It merits substantial aggravated damages, and Mr. Mitchell asked for $50,000 in aggravated damages. I have concluded that there should be judgment for Mr. Mitchell in the sum of $300,000 for non-economic loss and $50,000 in aggravated damages. As I say in my reasons, he may well have been justified in being ordered to pay more than $50,000 in aggravated damages, but that is the amount sought by Mr. Mitchell, and that is the amount I shall award. In addition, Mr. Jobst should pay interest on those amounts. Unless I receive submissions for some other order as to interest, it seems to me, from other cases, that the appropriate rate and period of interest will be 3% per annum from the first date of publication to today. That amount
Why should there be interest in damages anyway, at all in the first place?
for a total of $40,446.58. Finally, ordinarily an unsuccessful party is ordered to pay the successful party's costs of the proceeding. At present, I see no reason why I should not make such an order against Mr. Jobst. However, I should give the parties an opportunity to seek an alternative costs order, either now or by written submissions to be provided within 14 days, but preferably now. The judgment of the court is therefore 1. Judgment for the plaintiff for damages for non-economic loss in the sum of $300,000 plus interest, subject to either party seeking a different order as to interest upon delivery of this judgment or by filing a serving written submission within 14 days, of $34,668.50. Judgment also for aggravated damages in the sum of $50,000 plus interest of $5,778.08, subject to either party seeking a different order as to interest upon delivery of this judgment or by filing a serving written submission within 14 days. 2. Unless either party seeks a different order as to costs, either upon delivery of this judgment or by filing a serving written submission within 14 days, the defendant pay the plaintiff's costs of this proceeding. I publish my reasons together with a short summary of those reasons. Both documents will be publicly available shortly on the Queensland Court's website.
Now, again, if he has a documented history of filing frivolous lawsuits, regardless of what's the legal norm, surely it would encourage him to do this more often if he has no monetary cost for doing so. If the other person's representation has to pay his own legal representation as part of winning or losing the lawsuit, right? Like, I don't know. This is kind of insane to me. When it should be the opposite. It should be going in the other direction.
Are there any submissions on questions of interest and costs?
The plaintiff position makes submissions on costs today. The plaintiff's position was first questionable event, but it was what I've said. My client will seek costs first on an indemnity basis or on a totally understanding basis. Can I start by taking you on to section 40 of the Defamation Act, please?
So he only briefly touched on it, but there was also, so in the course of these proceedings, right, he talked about the belief in the truthfulness or something of the witnesses. I forget the exact language that he used, but he made some remark to that effect very briefly, just in passing. As part of the proceedings, Karl Jobst, one of the witnesses called was Karl Jobst's, I think, son or like stepson or like he's an uncle to them, something like that. I don't know. They had some sort of family connection relation or whatever, right? And as part of the proceedings, it was just basic, standard procedure that cell phones should not be on and used within the courtroom while the proceedings are going on and things of that nature, right? Karl Jobst was noted numerous times as having his phone out, and either texting or doing something on his phone, and had to be, I think, reprimanded at least, I think, twice by the judge for doing so, and be told and reminded otherwise. And in one of these instances, prior to the family relationed person being called as a witness for Billy Mitchell's side, was that it was believed by the other witnesses sitting in the rows observing the trial and things like that, that he was seen texting that witness that he's supposed to not be communicating with, prior to them giving testimony, essentially coordinating their testimony based on the prior testimony of the case and whatnot. And like, this was never reprimanded for, this was never offered as aggravating damages in Karl Jobst's direction or whatever. He essentially just got like, it was brought up to the judge the next day that this potentially had occurred, and he was like, well, I hope that didn't occur, and blah, 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 like, but essentially no actual punishment or consequences happened as a result of it. And I believe part of the reason that they gave for doing this was that Billy Mitchell and the family relations person had to, like, they were going to go get dinner later that night afterwards, after the trial proceedings of that day. And so they were coordinating what they were going to be having for dinner or something, which is like a natural family need thing to be able to be doing. But you could coordinate that either before or after. You don't need to be doing that in the middle of the courtroom. And B, like, it's just a pretty bad excuse, right? Like, I mean, like, okay, obviously, there still should probably be punishment if you can't just obey the basic rules of things, and are potentially, like, violating the sanctity of the witness statements and whatnot. And so, in my opinion, this witness is already borderline not trustworthy in the first place because of their relation, but even beyond this additional factor should clearly be an aggravating assessment in the nature of, like, well, Billy Mitchell's witnesses are completely untrustworthy, right? Like, he's had numerous other people lie on his behalf, and he's tried to pressure to lie on his behalf numerous times throughout history. So can we really trust them? Like, come on. Okay. Anyway, just wanted to bring that up.
And in particular, you're right, section 42, section 40, sub 2, sub A is relevant in circumstances.
So I think that's the basic end of the judgment or whatever. I'll probably end this here. Essentially, yeah, the judge decided the case wrong. It should have been the other direction, because basically everything that he said was factually true. There's a bunch of additional circumstantial evidence that contributes to it being factually true, that contributes to Karl Jobst not committing defamation, and contributes to Billy Mitchell having this reputation and would have had this exact same reputation whether Karl Jobst ever made this video or not, or otherwise, because it's just the natural logical conclusion that any sensible, reasonable person would come to similar conclusions based on the available information and knowledge of the information, that yes, the A does lead to B, does lead to C. That just makes sense. And so, of course, people, given the information of A and given the information of B, will be able to independently come to the conclusion of C, because it just naturally, logically follows from the prior things. Like, if you know a person has been cheating and lying and using others and abusing the legal system and things like this for decades at this point and lying tens of thousands of times, you're probably going to think he's a bad person. You're probably going to think, oh, when he hears that a person that he bullied ends up potentially losing their life because of it, and he's not in any way, like, whatever, feeling bad about the person's death or something, or like contributing to the cost of loss of life or anything of that nature, that you would think them also a terrible, even worse person, which they are and did happen, and then all these myriad of other things, like, right, like, you would naturally come to those conclusions, because obviously you would, because they're obviously true. Those are obviously sensible conclusions to come to. So anyway, I'll be done there for now. Yeah, I think this case was decided incorrectly. I think it's halfway the judge's fault, but also this is like, he's an older guy, right? It's like an online niche subculture weird thing. Billy Mitchell's a weird dude. Like, it probably shouldn't be expected that he would be able to come to become aware of all of this contributing information. Like, he should have read this Perfect Pac-Man, all the evidence and cases and things like that related to Billy Mitchell and the history there. That there's been numerous other write-ups of all this stuff prior to and things like that. You could find other places where people came to these similar conclusions that Billy Mitchell's lawsuit against Apollo Legend probably contributed to his choice to take his own life, just naturally before Karl Jobst ever published his video. I'm sure you could find those comments if you went looking for them. They're probably not that hard to find because, again, that's just a conclusion that a reasonable person could come to on their own independently and would naturally be likely to. And that doesn't make what Karl Jobst is saying defamation. I think there's like a minor amount where you could say Karl Jobst should have done more whatever background information before publishing his video or something, but I don't think it rises to the level of being defamation because certainly there are other like numerous, I'm trying to be like whataboutism, but like there are numerous other actual journalistic publications that publish other things that they believe to be true at the time and then turn out to be false on like a complete regular basis, right? This happens all day, every day of the week, all around the world, all the time. And we're not having defamation cases over each and every one of those things, right? And certainly one niche subculture YouTuber or whatever making a video that makes one of those claims is a lot different to if, Wired or, I don't know, GameFAQs or some other video game publication. I don't even know. Kotaku. I don't even know what places make publications anymore. Penny Arcade, maybe? I don't know. Made those same statements. Like some of those have a lot more sort of journalistic reach and things like that, and made it basically exactly similar statements because again, those are factually verifiable statements and conclusions that one would come to, and are not defamation of themselves. So yeah, I was quite disappointed in the result of this case because I thought the judge had mostly been following and seemed aware of some of these things over the course of the trial. It seemed towards the end of the trial that it seemed like, oh, he's maybe not as aware of some of this stuff as we thought and hoped. Like, I don't think he had seen the King of Kong documentary and was, I guess, requested kind of to like later watch it or something as part of the proceedings of this. But like when he heard that like, oh, there was, however many thousands of comments on this YouTube video, like that's not unusual for a YouTube video, especially one that has, a million subscribers or something like Karl Jobst does or whatever. There's going to be a ton of comments. And there's going to be a ton of comments saying all kinds of ridiculous things. That doesn't make Karl responsible for what those comments say, like there are people that, on any million view video about any political figure or something, there are going to be completely insane people saying completely insane things in the comments. They're going to be thinking like a pizza parlor has, lizard alien people, abducting children out of it, right? But that doesn't mean that the, whatever, like Hillary Clinton or somebody talking on, C-SPAN is like making defamation against a pizza parlor, right? Like the chain of logic to make these things is like completely insane. Okay, anyway, I'm like repeating myself a whole bunch of times. Anyway, yeah, I think that was kind of the missing context of this video that this judge really failed to accurately reflect in making his decision that he missed out on. And unfortunately, we're probably all going to be worse off for it.